El Salvador's New Mega Prison is simply the most controversial prison in the world, a living hell where no inmate would ever want to live. One day in this prison can make the offender regret all of their past crimes, no matter how vicious of a criminal they might have been back in the day. It can bring the worst of the people back in line. But if that's the case, then why is this prison all over the news?
First came into power in 2019, and for nearly 2 years, he's overseen a vast and brutal crackdown on gangs.
Human rights groups are dismayed, as are relatives, as more than 65,000 people have been arrested over the past year.
The secret will terrify you. Let's dwell on it. A look at the El Salvador's Mega Prison, Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo, more commonly known as CICOT, was opened in the year 2023. Even since the news became public, all eyes have turned to the prison that is the largest in Latin America. The whole facility is gigantic, with 238 blocks and 8 units spread over a massive area of 58,125 square feet. Reports say that the prison can hold more than 100,000 inmates, making it the 4th highest prison population in the whole world. No way out. The plot is at a remote place that one can't even spot from a far distance. The inmates coming down here know that there is no way out, but it is not like the inside security will even let your mind wander there. There are about 600 soldiers and 250 National Civil Police members guarding the outer areas of the prison. That's just on ground level. If you go up, the armed forces have enough eyes to cover the whole land. There are around 7 guard towers near the perimeter, overlooking every nook and corner of the facility. Soldiers are eyeing every move of the inmates from the towers so no one can step out of line. Once you are in, there is no hope of going back. The building itself is only spread on 57 acres of land, while the area for prison expands to 11 acres. With such a massive space, no inmate could even think about escaping. Not like that's an option. The walls are around 36 feet high with electric fences running up to 15,000 volts. Forget escaping, you cannot even plan a heist that would take you through the first security zone. And there are 7 such zones in place. The security measures are not just for the outside, though. The footage from the government shows the building was created as a maximum security prison. There are large X-ray scanners installed at the entrance. Any prisoner that goes inside has to walk through the scanner, and it isn't your run-off-the-mill scanner either. No, these powerful high-tech machines can scan your internal organs too. So, there is no chance of hiding anything under your clothes or pushing it in the back of your mouth. It is all in the open, and the prisoners have to deal with it. There is also a room equipped with the best of weapons and shields to help the guards fight back a possible retaliation, if that ever happens. With the tight security, one can say goodbye to any retaliation or riot that may happen inside the cells. There is simply no chance. The guards pull off a surprise search operation at any chance they can get to scare the prisoners into complying with all orders. Inside the cell blocks, inside the prison, you will see a different tale, but it is more vile than what you see from the outside. There are 8 main blocks, out of which 6 are for the inmates. The cell blocks have tens of modules with 80 bunk beds. There are 2 toilets and 2 basins. Now put that in comparison, there are over 100 inmates stuffed inside this module and only 2 toilets. The math simply doesn't add up, does it? Even if the 100 inmates find some room to sleep, the bunk beds don't have any mattresses. The authorities didn't believe in providing mattresses because they thought the gang members would come up with a clever ruse to hide weapons there. But it seems like they wanted everything to be in plain sight so they could keep an easy watch. It is the same reason for not providing any utensils to inmates during lunch. The guards have the fear that anything could turn into a weapon. Sounds a bit extreme, doesn't it? But then again, these are not your ordinary criminals, but powerful gang members that were reigning terror for decades. So it does make some sense. The number of prisoners inside the jail also sparks a huge debate. The authorities insist that the number hits somewhere around 40,000, stuffed in only 6 buildings. But that's just the estimated number of prisoners inside the cell blocks. Reports claim that the actual number is much higher. You can only imagine what that would be like inside these cramped-up cell blocks. But why was this prison all over the news? Let's hit reverse. The terrible secret behind the controversy. Stepping into El Salvador, the only thing that citizens knew were the names of the 2 rival gangs that ruled the country. Imagine a foothold so strong that even the government cannot shake you. The powerful gangs could engage in acts of brutality that shook the entire region, but it would have no consequences. Anybody could die any day and at any place, and that little ball of fear was in the heart of every citizen at all times. These 2 gangs, MS-13 and Barrio 18, reigned terror in the region, forcing people to pay bribes and taking their lives if they refused to pay the hefty fines. Many people report that their loved ones were tortured for as little as $20. Let's just say that the 2 gangs would be playing a pick-me fight and they did not care about collateral damage, be it a bus full of passengers or a single person at the wrong place and the wrong time. The viciousness because of the rivalry would digest anyone into a horrible spiral of revenge attacks. So, when President Nayib Bukele called a war on the 2 gangs, the country couldn't help but feel elated. The gang members were cracked down, and they were sent to this shiny new prison. Reports were, if you went inside once, you would never see the light of freedom again. With news like this, it was hard to judge how far the country was willing to go to bring these gang members to the line. But the president was pretty serious about it. Within 2 months, over 70,000 gang members were arrested and thrown into this prison to spend the rest of their sentences here. But here is when the depth of the crackdown started to show its true colors. The footage showed the gangs being transported on a bus in cotton shorts with their heads shaved and hands tied to their backs. They were forced to run together in a large group towards their new homes. But the sight of these prisoners called the public to resemble it with the sight of concentration camps. People started calling it the black hole of human rights. And that's when the controversy started brewing about what the authorities intended to do to these prisoners. The answer will shock you. The inmates forced to face the consequences. They were brought in as terrorists, and that thought remains consistent throughout the whole facility. With the tight security measures and the strict dealings, the answer is pretty clear. They were to be treated as terrorists too, and no one was going to be released. Plus, the prison is made to look as depressing as possible. The inmates cannot avail any luxuries as they can in other prisons. No, this one is a whole different breed. From TV screens to video games, there is usually an entertainment unit for the prisoners in jail, but that is not the case here. If that isn't bad, the prisoners are expected to pay the price for the necessities too. The authorities have pulled their hands up in surrender to cater to the prisoners. Food, cleaning essentials, clothing items, and other related costs inside the prison are not free. The relatives of the inmates have to pay a hefty fine, rising to $170 a month. That's nearly $2,000 a year. The trade inside the prison is costly too. Apparently, a soda can maybe be purchased at a high rate of $10. It seems like the authorities are only there to feed the inmates a meal of torture with a side of revenge. That might seem strange, but it isn't a secret that the gang members in the cells of this massive prison are seen as ferocious criminals who ruined the country's peace. There is no doubt that guards hold contempt for the inmates, and that shows in the prison's infrastructure too. The guards have a special building with resting quarters, ping-pong tables for leisure time, and a gym for exercise. They needed to be fit and well-rested to do their duties in the prison, which is not something you'd find in other places. You'd think they forgot to upgrade the cell blocks with some of these perks, but the reality is quite the opposite. All of it is intentional. The contrasting difference was to show the gang members how the tables have turned and the power now rests in the hands of the prison guards. You see, years before the criminals tasted the rottenness of this prison, the atmosphere in jails was pretty different. Criminals would be walking around with illegal activities running rampant inside the cells, while prison guards were paid to stand and watch. But the shift of power in El Salvador's prison is quite evident, and the authorities wanted to make sure the gang members knew that every waking second of their sentence in prison. 1,000 guards are stationed at the facility with double the number of soldiers for added security. But here's the thing, one guard is responsible for 40 inmates. That's practically impossible, unless the guards are superhumans. That's the only way to answer this absurdity. Now, that's just what is publicly known. The government has been pretty crazy about keeping everything off record. They claim that the security and conditions inside the prison are strictly confidential. Is it so that they could get by anything? Well, that's what the gossip mill tells us too. Some of the prisoners were released, and they said that they hadn't seen anything worse than this prison. Mind you, they have been gang members all their lives. They must have seen their fair share of horrors. Plus, other reports from experts force us to think the same, that there is a lot more going on inside than the authorities want us to know. Don't believe us? Check out these terrifying details, shocking news from inside the prison. Everything remains under the curtains of the prison. There isn't much coverage allowed either. One journalist from the BBC managed to get inside, but it was a pretty controlled tour of the prison. Even the guards chose to keep their identities hidden throughout the tour and were seen wearing ski masks. But why hide their faces if nothing is going on inside, right? You might argue they don't want to be targeted by the gang members that might be underground. But that's just one way of seeing this whole facade. If we dig up the secrets that run inside the facility, they aren't pretty. The members of the same gang were not put together. Some think it was to insult the gangs and their beliefs, but another theory suggests that it was done to cut the communication between the members. Since the outside communication is completely cut off, the members only had each other in the prison. But that's not possible either anymore, since the tight security measures do not just allow the prisoners to mingle with each other. This is also why the possibility of retaliation is minimized. You might think this is embarrassing and lonely enough for the gang members, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. This humiliation is nothing compared to what the prison guards have in store for these criminals. Sources say that the criminals are often deprived of food and water. The guards go beyond their power to make sure that the inmates are left pleading in front of them. But here is where it gets harsher. The guards only want them to beg, and their answers are just as cruel as ever. When they are left with their hungry stomachs rumbling for a long time, the prison guards would make the grand entrance with buckets filled with food to the brim. They would tease and mock, making experts question if the guards even had an ounce of humanity left. The guards would throw the buckets inside the cell, mixing food with dust and mud. They would not be given any utensils nor the dignity to eat properly. They would be demanded to sit on all fours and eat with their mouths like animals. If any of the prisoners dare not comply with the orders, a beating would be promised by the guards in return. And it is not like the food is pretty great in taste. There is no meat and a few limited options that the inmates can try out. They are cooked by criminals from other prisons as part of fulfilling their community services, but they are never allowed to interact with the inmates of this high-security prison. Even the cooks are monitored by guards so that they do not end up doing anything funny or suspicious. But it isn't any better outside the cell either. As mentioned before, the perks inside the jail are almost zero. The only thing the prisoners can do is watch the fleeting time pass before their very eyes and watch their lives fall into nothingness. The lights never go off in this jail, even if it is the middle of the night. This might not seem like a big deal, but it is usually the first form of psychological torture, to give the prisoner no sense of time or what the day looks like outside the four walls of the prison. They are allowed a few minutes in the corridor, but even that sometimes means following a strict exercise routine. Who wants that, right? But the prison found a way to keep the inmates physically active, just enough to let them feel like they could fight back. The brutal exercises are done in groups and only for a few inmates at a time. It is all controlled, and there is nothing the prisoners can say that would change the minds of these guards. The heat is centered around the prison, with temperatures rising to 35 degrees inside the cell blocks. Plus, you all know how the actual population of the prison remains a big, burning question. That means one cell block is stuffed with hundreds of inmates in hot temperatures. You think it doesn't get any worse than this, but it does. All of this is without the torture that goes around the prison. The real problem is the behavior of the guards with the prisoners. The reports that have come out of the guards misusing their power while treating the inmates are nothing short of harrowing. The prisoners are not allowed to talk at night. They cannot utter a single word of complaint to the guards because that would be met with a beating that will go unreported and unaccounted for. That's not all. The prison guards would often find an excuse to beat the criminals. The inmates would often be forced down into a kneeling position, and then a few unlucky inmates would be selected at random. The guards would then play Russian roulette to see which form of torture fell on the helpless prisoner. Often, it would be beatings with batons that would be part of everyone's fate, no matter how the situation starts or ends. But sometimes, the guards would go one step further and bring in the electric shocks to give to the prisoners. Plus, if the prisoners somehow managed to make the guards mad, the beatings would then turn into a trip to the isolation cells. Now, a normal day in this jail is like solitary, so you can only imagine what goes on inside the isolation cells. They are tiny cubes with no windows. There is complete darkness inside these cells to fill the prisoners with a feeling of dread and hopelessness. Apart from no light, the cells also do not have a bed or sometimes even a toilet. They are forced to do their business in the small room while living in the same locked room without anyone batting an eye at these horrifying scenes. This is probably why solitary is considered the most frightening punishment inside prisons, because it is just you with your thoughts for hours long gone without any idea what day it is inside the cell. But solitary in the worst prisons in the world? Yeah, it does not paint a pretty picture. A few reports claim that the guards would even draw blood from the inmates without offering any reason to them. God knows where that blood went, but there is something even more terrifying about all of this. The inmates aren't given any proper medical treatment. There are several nurses and doctors, about 50 in number. Considering the number of beatings and the number of prisoners, there is little hope that the healthcare system is efficient inside the prison. Many relatives even reported that the guards would quiet them down if they asked too many questions. Some of them would send medications to their loved ones inside who had fatal diseases. But nobody knows if they even reached the inmate. Plus, there was a huge debate among experts that the prison played a huge part in disappearing people off the grid. A lot of people who went inside the prison do not get to meet their families a lot. So, the relatives are left with speculations about what's going on with their loved ones, and the reports coming out of the prison only make them think the worst. Regular beatings would often take the lives of prisoners. The reported number reported is close to 100, but sources claim that it is not true and that there have been far more deaths because of the torture. What's troubling is that some sources believe that the prison has a mass grave. They dump the corpses inside without leaving any hint for the families. Other bodies were handed to families in closed coffins so they could never find out if the inmates were subjected to torture in prison. And the sad part is that coroners are involved in the whole fiasco. There have been many cases where the experts wrote fake medical reports to cover the beatings of many inmates. A lot of them were considered natural deaths, so the families would never question it. You might think they are criminals, and they should be treated that way, right? But not all of them are criminals. There have been reports about how the cops have caught people who had the slightest connection with the gangs. Some of them did not even have a connection, but a similar face to the wanted criminals, and they would be thrown in this high-security prison. A lot of such prisoners are minors, raising a big question of whether the inmates inside the cell blocks are innocent. Half the population in prison is awaiting trial with no hopes of getting a court date. That also puts the prison and their actions under a lot of doubt. If they are subjected to such a high degree of torture and pain, can't the authorities at least confirm if they are guilty of their crimes? There was this one case where a 22-year-old boy was arrested and accused of being part of a gang. He had no criminal record or even a bad reputation to his name. But like many others, he was thrown into jail along with the gang members. The initial arrests were high in number, and some of them were released after a few months. They all told the same tale about how the prison guards used excessive force while handling matters for no reason at all. The inmates and the gang members had no choice but to comply. Because of the strict rules, they could not do anything even if they wanted to, and the security measures kept that control in check. So, if that is the case, then is violent behavior being allowed without any regulation? Or is it all a tale to put the prison under a bad name? There are a lot of questions and no answers to this big mystery, but the reports of the horrors do make one ask if it is all indeed true. Now, you might judge all of these atrocities and might even call it a war against human rights, but that's not what the commons think. They firmly stand in support of the president in winning the battle against gang dominance that was rampant in the country for decades. Around 90% of the country's population believes that the president is doing the right thing. Plus, the statistics make it a bit hard to not believe that the methods are working. The country was the most violent country for many years in time. In the year 2022, there were 154 homicides recorded. In the year before, the number was nearly 500. But after the inauguration of this prison, the percentage dropped to nearly 70%. Human rights activists do not agree, though. They believe that the jail's confidentiality and shady measures pose a big question mark on whether the country is even interested in removing gang violence. They think that it is all a revenge scheme that has gone out of control. These activists might have a point too. Since there are no rehabilitation activities inside the prison, it has quickly turned into a concentration camp with controlled regimes for the prisoners. Plus, there is also the fact that the inmates are stripped of their basic rights while living inside the prison, which dampens the point of trying to eradicate violence. This may be a small chunk of all that goes inside the facility. There is so much more that the world is yet to see. What do you think about this prison? Do you think the authorities are right in their way of doing things since their country was terrorized for decades by these criminals? Or do you think the country can put some measures in control to regulate some of the basic rights of the inmates? Let us know in the comments below. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video. Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing content like this coming your way. Until next time, goodbye.